What's up everyone, welcome to Make with Jake. I'm Jupiter Jake. Today I want to show you this awesome little table I made. It's based on the Jupiter table from Nick Offermans book, Good, Clean, Fun. If you want to get your own copy, check the links in the description below. Let's dive right into it. For this project I'll be using this scrap wood. This is from a dead ash tree that was milled up, and they're actually the end pieces, so they were given to me for free, otherwise they were going to be burned. Let's go. The first step was to break these pieces down into more manageable sizes. I definitely used the handsaw to cut these down to length because I would never use a miter saw. Ever. But if you have a miter saw, you could probably use that as well. Once I got these cut down to length, I took them over to the jointer and joined two sides of each piece so that I could make sure the legs of my table were perfectly square. With the legs jointed, I used my table saw to cut the rest of the live edge off of each of the legs. Then I could set my fence to my exact dimensions I needed for each leg and cut that to the perfect size I needed for this project. With the stock all milled up, I grabbed my crosscut sled off the wall and then used it to cut everything down to the final length I needed for the legs. I really recommend you build a crosscut sled, so if you don't have one of these already, they are so handy and you save a lot of work from using a handsaw or one of those dumb miter saws. I wanted to taper the legs for this project, so I decided to use my jointer to do this. This is a really cool method and super accurate and repeatable. I highly recommend you try this out. I made a video about it not too long ago, so make sure you check the links below in the description and be sure to watch that video so you can do this on your next project. Then I cut the material and the cross members for the frame. This is the same ash material as the legs. I've already jointed and planed these parts. I'm just cutting it to length using my crosscut sled, and then cut these kind of half-lap joints in them. This will allow the stretchers to form sort of a cross-shaped joint. I keep adjusting my stop block to be sure I get the perfect fit dialed in for a nice and snug fit. I think this is going to work super well. Alright, so I've got the frame pieces all done now. All that's left over is to put in the dowel holes and get this thing sanded and glued together. So, let's do it. I'm using this dowel jig I recently got. It's a self-centering style jig, and I just clamp it onto the wood and then drill the dowel holes using different bushings. It's actually a really handy little device, but to be honest, I like the other fixed versions of the dowel jig a little better, but this worked well enough for this project. The last step before final assembly was to sand all the parts, because once it is assembled, it'll be much harder to sand into the corners and stuff. I broke the edges using some sanding blocks I made. Again, be sure to check the links in the description below to learn how to make your own sanding blocks. To glue the cross members together, I used some super glue and some wood glue. The super glue gives it a quick bond, and the wood glue gives it a more long-lasting bond. Then I drilled the hole through the center of the cross for a screw that actually holds the top in place later on. With everything glued up, I can go ahead and start assembling, so I used dowels and put them into all the holes of the legs, and then applied glue and worked my way around the cross frame until I had all the legs in place. Go ahead and make sure you use lots of clamps for things like this. You never have enough clamps, so every project is a reason to buy more clamps or just to steal your neighbor's clamps. I'm using this old, rough circle sawn cherry. It's super cool wood, so I broke it down into some smaller pieces and then cross-cut it using my crosscut sled, and of course jointed each piece and ran them through the planer. You know, the whole milling shebang. I then ripped these boards down on the table saw and then glued them into a larger panel. I made sure to use all the clamps my neighbor had, just in case I needed my clamp stash for something else. With the glue dry, I stuck the panel into my circle cutting jig. I have a video all about how I made this jig, so be sure to check the links in the description below and cut yourself out a perfect circle. I highly recommend this jig because it is super handy to have around. So the only issue with cutting a circle on the bandsaw is the edges can be really rough, and if you don't have a disc sander, this can be a little challenging. But I just clamped my belt sander to my workbench, and that actually worked really well. Now that I have the frame done and I got the top cut out, it's looking really good. All I have to do is do a quick finish sanding and then apply some finish. Let's go. All that was left now was a final sand. I worked through the grits, 120 to 220, and then between each grit I just made pencil marks to make sure I removed enough material evenly across the whole panel. So once I was happy with the finish, I go ahead and apply some finish. I use this shellac for this project. I really like shellac. It goes on super easy and you can apply it with these foam brushes and still get a decent finish. Cleanup is easy because I just throw these brushes away. They're so cheap and I simply move on with my life. So once I applied a couple of coats to the top, I moved on to the frame. This is the first coat. I'm just trying to get a thin sealer coat so that when the second coat goes on, it's nice, smooth, and of course beautiful. A cool trick I learned is to nail some small brads into the ends of each leg. What this allows you to do is to flip the entire table over and set it onto your workbench. And now you can do the second coat of finish without setting the frame up on blocks or getting finish all over your beautiful workbench or something. You might be wondering, Jake, how did you attach the top of the table to the frame? Well, that's pretty easy actually. When I assembled the cross members of the frame, I drilled a counterbore hole through the center of them, and then later on I took a fastener and ran it all the way through those cross members into the center of the circle tabletop. This method works really great because I don't have to worry about any wood movement or anything like that. And if you're worried about the strength of the top, this table was really only meant to hold my bottle of Lagavulin, so I think it'll be just fine.